Hello everyone, this is Jim Laurin from EarthShift Global's headquarters here in Kittery, Maine. Just going to kick off today's webinar, and I want to thank everyone and wish everyone a happy new year, and thank everyone for joining today's webinar. And this is the third in our series on sustainable return on investment. And for this session we have Lise Laurin, who's the CEO of EarthShift Global, and she's going to walk us through our 3Pillars application and give some great tips and some great pointers on sustainability return on investment and how to use the 3Pillars tool to evaluate a variety of different projects that you may have in your portfolio, if you will. But before we get started, I want to go through a little bit of housekeeping. So we're using the GoToWebinar platform today, and we want to make this as interactive as possible. And to do that, we utilize the chat feature within GoToWebinar. So if you have, and it should be in your lower right-hand side of your screen, there'll be a little chat box. And if you have a question for Lisa, we'll save some time at the end where we'll go through some of those questions. If you just go ahead and type it into the chat window and just select Send to Staff, we'll go ahead and collect those questions and come back in and answer them at the end. We will be recording this session, so you will be able to review it or share it with your colleagues. So don't worry too much there. But hopefully you'll have lots of questions, and we'll make this as interactive as possible. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Jim. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to sharing a bit about 3Pillars with you. The tool actually is one that I, in a way, developed for myself. I've done a lot of S-ROI over the years and needed a tool that helped me analyze the data that I was collecting from the workshops that we were giving. And so 3Pillars was to an extent driven out of that, and you'll see kind of what I mean as we go along. I thought we'd start off first with talking about what makes 3Pillars different from other tools. We saw AutoCase last month, and that's an awesome tool for looking at buildings or infrastructure projects. You can think of that in a way like, if you're an LCA practitioner, which I know a few of you are, you can think of that like EarthSmart, PackageSmart, or Sustainable Minds, kind of a more targeted tool to a targeted audience with a bit of streamlining built into it. 3Pillars is more like a CIMAPRO or a GABI for those who are in LCA. It's a little more difficult to use because it's incredibly flexible. It allows you to assess just about anything. So you could assess a building or infrastructure, although it'll take you a little longer than it will in AutoCase. But you can also assess things like a grant investment. You can assess things like a change in technology that you might not be able to do with an AutoCase type tool. It also has no built-in assumptions, which allows you to use different currencies, different types of models, and it's even been used to assess megajoules of energy in place of currency. So it's really very flexible that way. It has a social networking platform built in. One of the things that we found early on with S-ROI is that you really want to get stakeholder input or stakeholder representative input, and sometimes you want input from folks who are around the globe. Getting everybody in the same room can be expensive, and so in order to facilitate the dialogue that's so great with the stakeholder input, we built a social networking platform right into the tool, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. We can model any number of stakeholders, so you're not limited there. And we also have the ability to do cascading probability, which allows us to model all kinds of complex scenarios. And again, when we get into the tool, I'll show you a little bit more about that. The tool was developed in part with funding from the National Agriculture Research Organization of Japan. They were looking for an S-ROI tool in English, in Japanese, and at that point there were no tools that could even be translated into Japanese. So we developed this. It has been developed. It has been translated into Japanese, so Japanese users can use it in Japanese. We are also looking to translate it into Spanish over the next year or so. Before we jump into the tool, I want to go back quickly to the sustainable return on investment process so I can show you where 3Pillars fits in here. Remember, we define our goal and scope, and we do a traditional return on investment. That traditional return on investment data, as well as our LCA data, if we do a life cycle assessment, those go into 3Pillars. Then outside of the tool, we identify our stakeholders and get everybody together to hold a workshop. Much of the data then comes from the workshop and then fed into 3Pillars. So that conduct impact assessment box here, that's where 3Pillars comes in, that it actually does that number crunching for us and then helps us with the interpretation so we can feed back to our decision-making loop. In this slide, we're looking at some of the data gathering that we do that we're going to put into 3Pillars. As I said, before the workshop, we've got that traditional ROI and LCA, the list of stakeholders, and then we expand that list. We don't always model every stakeholder because sometimes all we have is qualitative data, that the stakeholders is kind of a minor stakeholder and probably isn't hugely affected, but we can identify whether they're affected positively or negatively. For those who are affected more strongly, we identify the risks and opportunities for each one and the probability of each risk and opportunity, and those are the data that we want to put into 3Pillars. Then we also do the costs and or benefits associated with each of those. Sometimes we find that in the workshop, folks have a hard time nailing down costs and benefits especially for intangibles. So often what we'll do is ask, what do you think about using literature values for that? If we go find some values from literature, would that make sense to you? And they'll usually agree with that. And so after the workshop, the facilitator will go and identify those values that can't be assessed. And that might be anything from poor morale to brand value, things like that are sometimes difficult for folks to look at. With that, I think I'm just going to double check that my system is logged in, and I'm going to share it with you. So here we go. Sorry for the bit of visibility here. Let's see if I can figure out how to make it full screen. There we go. What we're looking at here is the 3Pillars dashboard. We have our projects on the right-hand side and the ability to create a new project. You'll see we have a project template and a specific project here. I'm going to go through the template later. I want to start with this Southern Kyushu ethanol plant. This was a project that we did in Japan. You'll see a bit of a description here, and then you'll see the latest analysis results. This is the net present value by the year on the x-axis for building the ethanol plant. We can go from here to the project setup, which is the next tab. And here's where we define the project. So the project has a name, it has a goal and scope, which is in here. That's what goes to populate the description on the dashboard. We can identify our project participants here, And in the future, we'll be able to invite those participants into the project. There are actually two different types of users for 3Pillars. We have the facilitator who can do everything on the right-hand side here and enter all the data. And you may have one or two facilitators per project. And then the rest of the folks are what we call viewers. The viewers are able to use the discussion board over here on the right. They're able to see everything on the left, but they can't change it. That gives us a little bit of change control. So only the facilitators make changes. But those changes can be documented in the discussion board. Each tab, and in fact each cost and scenario, has its own discussion board. This enables folks to have conversations. Do they want to add another alternative? Do they have additional information that they want to add in here? Or do they disagree with something that's in here? They can go ahead and type that in and post it. We have the year of project start. That's the year that we first start having costs. And then the year of last cost, which allows us to have multiple time horizons. We can look at 10 years, 20 years, but this is the last year that we would enter any costs or benefits. At the bottom, we can identify our alternatives. So we may have build the ethanol plant. That's our one alternative. Do not add the ethanol facility is, in this case, our base case. We could add many more alternatives and assess those as well. So we might build the ethanol plant with funds from the community, for example. Or we might build an ethanol plant that was twice the size. Those could all be other alternatives that we could look at. If we really have only one alternative and the base case is 0, we can use 0 as our base case and only have the one alternative. We can also use 0 as a base case to identify risks. We have the ability to copy this when we are looking at multiple stakeholders. I often fill in what's common to all of them and then copy it. And then I can change the name of the particular stakeholder here. So here we're looking at the ethanol plant. We also have the sweet potato farmers, for example. We have the pig farmers, and so I could just copy this for each of those. Let's go now into the traditional costs, which is the next tab. This is where we put in our traditional return on investment. You'll see that we've got labor in here, we've got revenues, we can also have capital costs in here. So like the best bioethanol plant construction here, we can take a look at. For each cost and benefit, we can identify if it is a cost or a benefit, so that our numbers are always entered positive as positive numbers. Makes it easy so that you don't make mistake there. We identify which of the different alternatives that the cost applies to, and we can even link them if they need to be the same cost and identified the same way throughout the Monte Carlo analysis. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So I have the option of various distributions on each of our costs. I can have no uncertainty, log normal, etc. This is to allow us to include uncertainty even in our traditional return on investment. And there are clients who have considered using this only for traditional return on investment because it allows them to include those uncertainties in here. For example, the electricity production here and most of our fuel costs, we will put a log normal distribution on. Typically we'll put the median as current value and then put the maximum at something at 3 to 4 times that. This ensures that, for example, in 2011, we had no idea that energy prices were going to plunge, the gasoline was going to plunge to the realm of $2 per gallon. And so this type of a curve did allow that to be included in our predictions. Excuse me. As I said, we have the ability to include these capital purchases where we have different types of depreciation rates. We can do a straight line or a double declining balance in any number of years for each of those and a salvage value. This allows it to be flexible for all different types of tax systems, if you will, where all different types of things are allowed. As I said, we use a Monte Carlo analysis to do the analysis. And what the Monte Carlo does is, if you are into science fiction, it allows us to predict 1,000 futures. And in each of those futures, it will choose a value from this distribution and from all the other distributions that we have programmed into our model. And so each time we'll have a different answer for each one of these distributions to give us our final result. So we have a whole bunch of runs that then we can build a new distribution that shows us the distribution and the likelihood of different results. And if there are any questions on that, please type them into the chat and I'll see if I can't answer them at the end. All right, let's go into the scenarios. Here is where we program in our risks and opportunities. So here we've got the risks and opportunities for the ethanol plant. Some of these may end up being risks and opportunities for others. If we have an opportunity, for example, for a company to make money, there's probably an opportunity for their suppliers also to increase their revenues. There may be a probability that their customers will spend more money because they're buying these new products or services or expanded products or services. So those would be scenarios that might go across multiple stakeholders. You'll see here that we have either the ability to put in a single probability or a probability range for our these probabilities. In this case, we're looking at the sweet potatoes requiring pesticides, and the minimum here, minimum probability is 67%. The maximum is 100%, because the sweet potato farmer thought that there was likely to have a need for pesticides. In fact, they thought there was a 100% probability, whereas the researchers who were also in the room thought that there was only a 67% probability. So we had those two probabilities, we accepted both. So the Monte Carlo is going to run with all of those values and take everyone's consideration into account here. You'll also see here that we have this ability to do the sub-scenario. This is our cascading scenario. And let me just come down to this explosion destroys part or all of the factory. You'll see that this is a sub-scenario of the explosion. So there's a very small likelihood that we will have an explosion, about a 1 to 3% with this ethanol plant. And there's a 1 in 10,000 chance, 1 in 1,000 chance that the explosion will destroy the factory. So the explosion has to occur for this 1 in 1,000 chance. And so it's a cascading probability. And this allows us to look at those types of scenarios. If you've looked at the uncertainty book by Morgan and Henryan, they have a good example of a cascading scenario where they're looking at the probability, they're asking people the probability that Arnold Schwarzenegger will have another term as governor. And the probabilities that they were coming back with were in the 60–70% region. People felt pretty strongly that he would win. However, when they asked those same people, what's the probability that Arnold Schwarzenegger will run again, it was much, much lower because in fact, he had said he wouldn't run. So you need to include the probability that he will run before you can then assess the probability that he would win. This is what this allows us to do. We can add new scenarios. It's really easy to delete things with a little trash can. And of course, there's always a "are you sure?" in there. Our discussion board, we can add lots of discussion here. And there are some little icons here that make it easy to copy the information from one year to another. Let's jump to our scenario costs here. The scenario costs are then associated with those risks and opportunities. So if our risk occurs, then the cost is likely to occur. We have all the different options available to us as our traditional costs. So when we need to rebuild the facility, we have a capital cost. We also have the ability to change the costs based on what year they occur by clicking here. And that allows us, so if, for example, we think there's a regulation going to come into place 5 years after the start of the project that's going to change what that capital cost will be to rebuild after our explosion, we can include that in here. We also can have multiple years of costs associated with one incident. So, for example, if our explosion occurs in 2011, we may have to rebuild in 2011, but we may also have to do additional marketing, say, in year 2012. And so we might have another year, and it would be the year after the year of occurrence that we would put that cost for the marketing. And so we would include that in there. And then we get to what you've all been waiting for, which is the analysis. Because we're dealing with financials, we have the ability to put a discount rate on this. This is the Japanese government discount rate of 4%. Looking at a time horizon of 20 years, we can look at any type of time horizon. And in fact, even though this says years, you can even look at months. You just have to pretend that your years or months elsewhere in the model. We can put our tax rate in and model before or after tax. Go ahead and analyze here. While we're doing this, you'll see that there's a button up here for a tutorial. You can at any time select this button and you'll be put into a tutorial of how to use 3Pillars. So if you've forgotten or if you're just getting started, you can always click that button and get some help. So here we are in the Analysis tab. The first analysis results you get are the cost by cost. This is a very simple data available to us in a graph or a data table. And this allows us to see what the results are of what we put into our model. And I find this really useful for assessing whether or not I've built the model right. So it's really good for debugging. And you'll see that I can run through the different alternatives here, and I can also look at the whole list of costs or benefits associated with those different costs and benefits. I can look at the cost by cost type. So this particular tab allows me to choose looking at my scenario costs, my risks and opportunities, or the traditional costs. I can also look at, and here's, go back real quick. The line graph, some folks find this really useful, others find it not so pretty. You can be of either type. You can save the graph in this format, or you can take your data table and either save it to Excel. There's a little button down here to save as Excel, or what I find really easy is to copy and paste either the whole table or part of the table. And the next little button here is one that I use all the time. This is our NPV with respect to baseline by cost. And so this is really where I get a lot of great data so that I can share with folks what the different costs look like, costs and benefits. And so here's where we can look at the order of magnitude of these various costs and benefits and see what's important. In some cases, I'd rather do that by scenario. So the scenario, the risk or the opportunity may have multiple costs associated with it. So I can instead look at it by the risk or opportunity. Same kind of thing. The last tab is our bottom line, our end net present value with respect to baseline by the alternative. And you'll see here, of course, that the do not add the ethanol facility has 0. There's nothing here because everything, this has been subtracted from everything. Whether you build the plant or you don't build the plant, it's been subtracted. That's giving us the delta or the net present value. And again, we have a data table that we can export or copy and paste. The last tab is the reporting tab, and that we don't have available to us yet at this point, but it is in the works. So that will allow us to not only share this information, but it will also allow us to drag and drop any of the discussion on the left, any of the details that we've put in on the left-hand side, as well as any of the discussion that is in here, and just drag and drop it right into the report, making reporting very easy. I'm now going to switch us back, I hope, to the PowerPoint here.
Hey Lisa, it's Jim. I'm just going to jump in for a quick second and
sure.
just let people know if they do have questions. I know you just went through quite a bit of detail, and we have a number of questions already stacked up. But if you do have questions, please submit those through the chat panel and go ahead and select send to staff, and we'll make sure we cover those off at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I am going to finish a little early, so we're going to have plenty of time for questions. So do keep those coming in, even though we have a few in the queue. All right. So as I said, the reporting is in development. We also have the ability to define the number of Monte Carlo runs in development. We right now have a fixed number of 1,000 runs, but are going to be able to choose that. We're also looking at building the cost ranges in for environmental impacts, which reminds me, I forgot to show you the template. So we'll go back to that, and I'll share with you what we do have built in at this point. Longer term, we're looking at some additional visualization, so you don't have to rely as much on Excel for visualization outside of those graphs I showed you. The ability to compare projects, the ability to invite users through the interface, some easier modeling techniques, and nuanced cascading probabilities. We're waiting for additional users to sign up so that we can fund those additional additional work. So let me go back again to 3 pillars that I did miss showing you. Is this project template. So I'm not going to end quite as early as I thought. Here we go. So the project template comes with the paid version of 3 pillars, and it gives you a little more guidance on what to put where. You'll see we have business as usual, how we've been doing things, fun new projects. Here's our new project. In the traditional return on investment section, we took information from the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, and so you can build a very extensive project in here with a lot of information that might be of use. If this is useful, you can use this. If it's not, you can, of course, start from scratch. But sometimes for the first time, it's useful to go through each one of these, and there's a little bit of explanation in each, well, except for the marketing, in each one of these that might help you a little bit with what you're trying to, what you might want to model in each one of these. And then we have our risks and opportunities. These come from the American Institute of Chemical Engineers from their sustainability guidelines. And so here you have a whole series of things you may want to look at and a bunch of questions to think about whether these are risks or opportunities. So this can be helpful the first time around. Also with the paid version, you get this in a spreadsheet format. So and you also get that with any of our, you get all of this with any, whenever you take one of our classes on S-ROI. And so this can be useful as you're getting started as a facilitator. What kind of questions should I be asking the group? And so that information is built in here, as well as I said, in spreadsheets. The scenario costs have information on various types of costs and literature values for those. So here you might see values for ionizing radiation, literature values for traffic congestion. And in each case there is a reference, and those references are also in the document that I said accompanies 3Pillars when you first get the paid version. So this is information to help you with some of those intangibles that might be a little more difficult to assess and that your project participants might have a difficulty using. And back to the PowerPoint. So just want to share with you the pricing. This is on our website, but if you are interested, we would love to have you come try it. On the next slide, I'm going to share with you the link to the 30-day trial, and Jim, I think you're going to send everybody a link to that after the webinar as well, in case you want to try it out.
Yes, we will.
Great, and then for any questions about that free trial, or if you're interested in a longer trial, or looking at something other than what's offered on the website, just email Jim at info@earthshiftglobal.com. And that's really it from my end, from my prepared information. Jim, I think you said we had some questions there.
We do. So why don't we go ahead and let you catch your breath for a second, and we'll go ahead and get those going. Great presentation. I think hopefully that gives folks a good sense for the 3Pillars tool, and hopefully a little bit of background on S-ROI as well. So one of the questions that came through, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase it a little bit, was you were showing lots of graphs of data and kind of analysis of data, and the question is just how in your experience, how have you incorporated that into a report or PowerPoint? How have you shared that with the client or with the constituents, if you will?
That's a great question. And I'll be honest, I often take the data out of 3Pillars and put it into Excel so I can show it in different ways. And I can do that one piece that I find really valuable, which is to compare different costs and compare the results for different stakeholders. We can't do that in the tool right now, so I'll often do that. If and perhaps at the end I can share an example. We did have an example in the November webinar. We had a couple of examples of how those might look.
Sure. Yeah. Great. And I suppose that this is a follow-on question. You did touch upon this in terms of the ability to export the results, but you also mentioned, in addition to just being able to hit the export to Excel, which I'm assuming basically exports the entire table, but you can also, as you said, cut and paste individual columns into that as well, columns and rows.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, what we'll often do, let me see if I can switch this around and get the analysis back up again. Yeah, I can copy specific rows, for example, and paste them in. Let me get the other one up.
Yeah, that's got to be really helpful when you're trying to put a report together and you just want to look at a certain couple of years or a certain scenario, if you will. So that's helpful.
Yeah, yeah, and in fact, that's one of the things that we're looking at adding in here. As I said, that's one of those things that being able to do some of this. So, for example, if I wanted to take 2020, I can just take the data from this year. Of course, it's not going to let me do that right now.
Yeah.
You just take the data from this year and just do a copy and a paste. So I just did a Control-C, and I can open up Excel and do a Control-V, and it'll paste that year's worth of data. Yeah, good question.
Very handy. So you touched upon this as well, and it's where the costing data. So you talked about the template, and inside the template there are some data around costs, and I know in some instances there's references there, but can you kind of touch base a little bit on that, where that came from and how that kind of works?
Sure, and that's an ongoing exercise, and so we had an intern a few years back who did a lot of research and grabbed all the data they can. There's actually right now a whole project to cost environmental intangibles, ecosystem services, a lot of those kinds of things. And so we're keeping an eye on what happens there, and we'll be incorporating as much of that data as we can. And as I said, it's our goal to provide some canned data that you can just grab and pull down, or grab and use, make it really easy for folks to include those costs. And the full cost range. That's one of the things that I really appreciate about our agreement with Impact Infrastructure, is they've also been working in this area. And so they're going to be helping us get more data in that area, and we're going to be helping them get more data in the social impacts area, which we've been doing for a lot longer than they have, and so we can share back and forth.
Great. So the next question is a little bit broader. It starts with, thank you for the presentation. And they're asking really, what types of projects would you recommend as a starting point? So imagining they've got a lot of things on their plate, is there a type of project that S-ROI is more suited to, I guess, is the question.
Your first project is going to be expensive and resource intensive, just because you haven't done it before. And those of you who have done LCA, you know that it takes a while. You make some mistakes along the way. You gather more data than you need, that kind of thing the first time around. So while it may seem counterintuitive, I would suggest that you start with a high-value project. And you probably want to start with a project that has a pretty clear environmental benefit, and perhaps some benefits to other stakeholders who are important to you. That allows you to get a win. From our experience, when you do a project that ends up borderline, and some of them do, just like in LCA, that there's a toss-up between Project A and Project B. You don't get the rapid buy-in as to this was a worthwhile exercise, this is a worthwhile thing to do, particularly when you look at how many resources it takes that first time round. Each time you do it, it's faster and faster. As I've mentioned before, we do a lot of work with Dow Chemical, and and looking at their sustainability goals every 10 years. And the last time around, man, they flew through their assessments. It took many fewer resources than it did the first time round. And so that kind of knowledge, knowing that it's going to get better and easier each time, you want to make sure that you make it worthwhile the first time, or you'll never get to that point. I shouldn't say never, but it will be more difficult to get to the point where you can do more quick and dirty assessments. If you can do an assessment in a tool like AutoCase, I would suggest you start with that. You know, the AutoCase is one where you don't have to expend all the effort. It is pre-built in, there's a lot of things. And then once you've gotten to the point where you really feel comfortable with that, and you want to try something that you can't do in AutoCase, I think then you're going to be real ready to do 3Pillars. That you'll have learned a lot through that first exercise, and now you can start on building a more generic type model.
Yeah, that's great advice. This next question, it really speaks to the user, which I think is very interesting. Again, thank you for the overview. Here they're talking about what type of professional. Is it an engineer? Is it an accountant? You know, who do you see as the user of 3Pillars? And I'm assuming they're talking about the facilitator in this case.
Yeah, it can be the facilitator, or it can be somebody who helps the facilitator do the modeling. It is useful to have an analytical background and to be comfortable with numbers. It can be difficult sometimes to figure out how to model a particular risk because of how the data came in, and so the ability to manipulate the numbers a little bit is helpful. And actually, I sometimes do some pre-crunching of numbers before I put stuff into 3Pillars as well. Particularly, okay, you have a cost and it increases by 10% per year. I can't do that calculation times 1.1 in 3Pillars, but I can do it in Excel. So I'll do that in Excel and then put the data into 3Pillars. I think financial folks, I think engineers will find this easy. Scientists will find this easy. You may find that folks that have a harder time with numbers have a harder time actually programming the data in, modeling the data in, I should say, not programming.
Yep. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That I think follows into our next question, which is, it really speaks to, you know, how people can get help and really help getting started. You know, I think if you can touch upon kind of some of the hybrid projects that we've done over the years, I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, all right. So first of all, I'd like to say we've got 3 different classes coming up. There is a 1-hour introduction to S-ROI that we're going to be providing this spring, as well as a 3-hour course. The 1-hour course is free. The 3-hour course carries a charge. And then we'll be doing a full day facilitation training as part of our spring boot camp. And maybe, Jim, you can give the dates for that at those courses at the end. So we have those classes coming up, and the boot camp you can attend just that S-ROI day if you want. We'll also be doing some LCA training if you're interested in that, and Matt Mayberry will be coming back to help us with our sustainability strategy and getting in front of the C-suite. So those are some opportunities for additional training. We are also always happy to work with folks on a progression basis, if you will, where we hold your hand as long as you need it and in the way that you need it. So often what we've done with folks is we have done the first facilitation with the client and then work together with the champion from the client side to do the modeling, so they learn to use 3Pillars, and then also with the report writing, so it's kind of a joint effort going back and forth with the client taking as much responsibility as they want at that point. Then we move from there typically to a joint facilitation where the client is taking, the champion is taking as much of a role, a lead role as they want with one of our EarthShift Global facilitators in the background to jump in whenever needed. And sometimes that's not at all, which is great. But sometimes it's most of it. Everybody learns at a different pace, and this allows folks to learn with that safety net in place. Again, the modeling and the report writing is a joint effort, making sure, going back and forth, making sure that everything makes sense, that the interpretation makes sense, etc. And then perhaps they're on their own, or perhaps they still need help. And again, we work on an as-needed basis. So we're happy to do that. There is, of course, some consulting charge associated with that. If you get to the point where you feel you don't need us and you just are getting 3Pillars and you need help with the tool, of course tech support is free, and we're always happy to jump on a web meeting with you to help you if you've got difficulty with the tool itself. Did I answer that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool.
And just to follow on in terms of the trainings, as Lisa was saying, we do have 2 upcoming interactive training sessions as part of the boot camps. The spring boot camp, it'll be April 12th for the full day, and then the fall boot camp is September 28th for the S-ROI days, just so you have a sense for those trainings. So the next question, and I think this is the last question at this point, is kind of goes more to the technology side of it in the sense that, the 3Pillars application, it looks like it's a web, just reading the question, looks like it's a web application. What's involved in kind of rolling that out in an environment?
Oh, okay. So it's really pretty easy. You'll just email us with who needs to be on the tool in what role, and we'll simply add them. It's really easy for us to go ahead and add folks onto the platform with you. And as I said, just tell us whether they're a facilitator or a user, and we'll just program that in. When you're ready to purchase, so as I said, you've got the ability to jump in on a 30-day free trial. When you're ready to purchase, then we will set you up with that project template. And if you need it, we can bring over any projects that you've built in your trial account as well. Jim, you can probably answer that question better than I.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're spot on. We try to make it as streamlined as possible, and there's nothing that needs to be installed on the client side. So everything's in the web, everything's in the cloud, so it's very easy to access from facilitation as well as from a practitioner as well, or from a participant, I should say. So that was it for the questions. Thank you very much, Lisa. I think this is a very informative, and I think it caps off the three-part series we've been running on S-ROI here for the last couple of months. And that really ends our 2016 webinar series, although it is 2017. We will be announcing new webinars for 2017 here shortly. Look to our website, look to our newsletter as a good source for that information. Those of you who aren't aware, we are actually publishing for 2017, we start publishing a S-ROI specific newsletter. So please jump on the website, sign up for that to get this really focused information specifically to S-ROI. And I think our first release will be in the next, I think next month is what we're targeting for that, as I look at one of my coworkers here to confirm that. So with that, I want to thank everyone for taking the time this afternoon. I think we had good attendance, some great questions, and some great content. And again, we have been recording this, and we will be making this recording available if you want to share it with your colleagues, like we do all of our webcasts. So once again, thank you everyone for attending, and have a great day.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everybody.